The Library Beneath the Ivy by Enchanted Tales Hub. Chapter 3. Eliza took a step toward the book with her name on it, and the air changed. The light, which had been golden and drowsy, cooled slightly, not cold, but crisp, like morning mist in a forest, before the birds begin to sing. Somewhere high above, a bell rang once. Low, distant, and deep. Basil the cat rose and stretched, then leapt from the shelf without a sound and vanished between the stacks. Eliza turned, sensing not footsteps exactly, but presence. Like the hush that falls when someone important enters a room. And then, from between two towering shelves lined with dream-pale volumes, someone appeared. Not walking, arriving. The figure was tall and draped in layers of fabric the color of dusk, gray, violet, deep green, stitched with threads that shimmered like ink in moonlight. Their face was angular and unreadable, framed by hair that shimmered silver in some places, soot dark in others, like candle smoke curling through time. But it was their eyes that stopped her. They were ink black, not empty, but deep like the space between stars, full of stories that had forgotten how to end. The figure bowed, ever so slightly. "Welcome, Eliza Fern," they said. Their voice was soft, but carried through the room, like a book being read aloud just for her. "You have found the place that remembers what the world forgets." Eliza opened her mouth, unsure if she meant to say hello, or what is this place, or how do you know my name. But the curator smiled, just a little. "I know many names. Most I carry for safekeeping. Some I return." They stepped closer, but not too close. Their gaze lingered on the book with Eliza's name. It is tempting, isn't it? To open a story with your own name. To peek inside the parts you don't remember or were never told. They tilted their head. But stories are not toys. They remember being broken. Eliza found her voice, quiet but steady. "What is this place?" The curator raised a hand, gesturing gently around them. "This is the Library of Forgotten Things, a sanctuary for memories misplaced, moments lost, and tales unwritten. It listens. It keeps. Sometimes it returns." They looked at her for a long moment. "You may explore. The library responds to need, not want. And it gives only what you are ready to carry." They began to turn, already fading into the stacks, but paused once more. "One last thing, Eliza Fern," they said, voice quieter now. "Not all forgotten things wish to be found." And then they were gone. For a long moment after the curator vanished, Eliza stood still. The book with her name on it glowed softly at the edge of her vision, like something waiting to be chosen. But something in her, curiosity, or caution, or the weight of the curator's words, pulled her in the other direction. She turned. The library breathed around her, quiet but full of listening. She wandered down a narrow passage between two shelves. They seemed taller here, more shadowed. One of the books whispered as she passed, "Don't you remember the apple tree?" She paused, but the voice fell silent. Another book nearby chuckled to itself, like a child remembering a secret. Eliza reached out and touched the spine of a book bound in linen the color of moss. It warmed beneath her fingers. Without thinking, she opened it. The air shimmered. For the briefest moment, a heartbeat, no more, she was somewhere else. A garden, rain on stone, laughter from someone she couldn't see. Then she blinked and the library returned. The book lay open in her hands, a single page half-inked. The rest was blank. She closed it carefully and set it back. Further on, a drawer had been left open just a crack. A scent wafted from it: cinnamon, damp wool, old paper. Inside, she glimpsed a folded handkerchief and a pebble smoothed by the sea. Tucked between them was a scrap of paper I didn't mean to forget. I just had to. Eliza closed the drawer. Above her, a spiral staircase wound upward into the branches of a tree that had grown through the shelves. She climbed it slowly, every step creaking like a question. At the top was a small alcove, a desk, a chair, a candle that lit itself when she stepped near. On the desk lay a book open to a single sentence. Someone is coming who will ask the right question. There was no name on the book, but the page turned as if nudged by an invisible breeze. Eliza stayed in the alcove a little longer, tracing her fingers over the desk's grain, watching the candle flicker even though no air moved. The sentence on the page, "Someone is coming who will ask the right question," felt like it had been waiting for her. But she didn't know what to ask, and the library didn't press her. When she finally rose and made her way back down the spiral stair, she noticed something strange. The path she had taken between those same two shelves, past the moss-colored book and the drawer with the handkerchief, was gone, replaced by a different passage, quieter, narrower, lit by a soft green glow, like filtered forest light. The books here didn't whisper. They watched, and in the hush of their watching, Eliza felt something shift in the air, not sound, exactly, but pull, like a thread tugging lightly at the corner of her sleeve. It led her back through the stacks, around a tall arch of woven roots, and into the open clearing at the heart of the library, where the pedestal stood, where her book waited. The book hadn't moved, but the light had changed. It no longer glowed, not outwardly. It listened. The name on the spine shimmered faintly, as if it were breathing. Eliza Fern. She stepped closer. This time, no voice stopped her. No cat, no curator, only her. Eliza hesitated, hand hovering over the cover. Her fingers tingled. The library was still, not holding its breath. Letting her choose, she reached out. The book opened without a sound. Its pages were thick and soft, edged with gold that shimmered faintly in the library's quiet light. Eliza held her breath, half expecting a gust of wind, a flash of light, some cinematic unfolding of magic. But instead, the book simply breathed, and then the ink began to appear. Not all at once, slowly, like fog settling into shape. On the first page, a sketch in faint charcoal, a small girl standing in a circle of wildflowers. Her hair was wind-tousled, her boots untied. She held a jar in one hand. A firefly hovered just outside it, as if unsure whether to be caught. The girl's face was turned to the side, but Eliza felt, without question, that it was her. Beneath the drawing, in neat, looping script, the last summer before forgetting began. Eliza turned the page. A sentence drifted across it, light as breath. You asked her to come into the garden, but she wouldn't. The door was already closed. Who? She turned again. This page was a collage, fragments more than story. A button sewn with thread too bright. A half-remembered lullaby. Starlight and wood smoke. Hush now, the day's done. A tiny smear of strawberry jam on someone's thumb. And then a single word written carefully at the bottom. Agnes. Eliza's chest tightened. She closed the book gently, the warmth of the pages still lingering on her fingers. The library remained still. No one spoke. But somewhere above, a lantern flickered slightly, as if stirred by an unseen breath. The memories in the book were soft, familiar, not dramatic, not frightening, but they tugged at her. Eliza tucked the book back onto the pedestal. Its cover no longer glowed. It simply rested there like something waiting to be remembered again in its own time. She turned and left the clearing, not entirely sure how she found the way back. The library rearranged itself gently beneath her steps, guiding her without instruction. As she passed beneath a low arch of ivy-laced beams, the whispering faded. The light dimmed, and then, with a soft click like a book closing, she stepped back into the hidden room. The door had not closed, but the ivy across the stone wall had begun to curl downward again, tendrils reaching for the seams. Eliza paused, placing one hand on the rough wood. Then she climbed the stairs, back through the cottage cellar, back past the jars of preserves and the shelves of dusty lanterns, back up into the quiet house, where a clock somewhere ticked calmly through the afternoon. The sun had shifted. Through the windows, the garden was a haze of green and gold. She found her aunt in the kitchen, slicing apples into a chipped ceramic bowl. The smell of cinnamon and butter drifted in the warm air. Agnes looked up as Eliza entered, eyebrows lifting slightly in a silent question. Eliza hesitated. The question stirred in her mind like leaves in a breeze. But all she said was, "Can I help?" Agnes blinked, surprised, but only for a moment. She nodded and passed Eliza a second knife. They stood together in the golden hush, slicing apples in quiet rhythm. Outside, a bird sang once and fell silent. Inside, something softened. Chapter 4. The next few days passed gently, like pages turned in a soft wind. The house was old in the way trees are old, quiet, rooted, full of stories told only in creaks and patches of worn paint. Eliza wandered through it with growing curiosity, letting her hands trail along the banister that had been polished smooth by time, listening to the different voices of the floorboards. There were corners that seemed to wait for her. A cupboard in the hallway that always stuck, but opened easily when she tugged just right. Inside, a stack of old linen tablecloths and a teacup with violets painted on the rim. Agnes's name was written underneath in careful, childish ink. A room at the end of the upstairs hall filled with light and dust motes, part sewing room, part sunroom, part memory. Dried lavender hung from the rafters. A sketch pad lay forgotten on the windowsill. Eliza peeked inside. Drawings, soft pencil lines, a pond, a girl, a cat, no names, just familiarity. Meals were mostly quiet. Agnes wasn't unkind, just careful, as if her words were things she'd tucked away and didn't quite remember how to unpack. But sometimes, when they worked in the garden or shelled peas at the back steps, she'd say something like, "Your mother used to pick dandelions and tell them secrets." Or, "You hated the rain until you didn't." Eliza would nod. She didn't know what to say, but the memories, once spoken, seemed to linger in the air like the smell of rosemary on the wind. It was on the third morning that something shifted. Eliza was dusting the bookshelf in the sitting room, a chore she'd offered to do, though she didn't know why, when she found a photograph tucked behind the row of books, faded and curled with age. 3 figures stood beneath a tree. A younger Agnes, unsmiling but not unkind. A woman with Eliza's eyes, laughing mid-blink. And a small child, blurred, caught in motion, reaching for something just out of frame. There was no note on the back, but something in Eliza stirred. The photograph felt like a door, and suddenly she needed, to open that book again. Not because of the library's magic, but because something inside her was tugging toward the truth, even if she didn't yet know the question. That night, as the house settled into quiet and the windows darkened with rain, Eliza slipped from her room. She moved barefoot down the stairs, past the sleeping hearth, through the kitchen and cellar, and back to the ivy-covered wall. The ivy shifted at her touch, curling back as though it had only been waiting for her hand. The door creaked softly open, and Eliza stepped inside. The hidden room was still and close, thick with the scent of moss and old paper. The door into the library stood at the far side, just as she had left it. But something was different. The light. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, beneath the floorboards. Not bright, not threatening. Just wrong, in a way that made her chest tighten. She pushed open the library door. The hush inside met her like breath, but it was too quiet. The whispering had stopped. The books no longer shifted or sighed. Eliza stepped in slowly, the soft soles of her feet brushing against the velvety wood. The usual warmth of the place had cooled, just slightly enough to raise the hairs on her arms. Then she saw it. On the floor, just a few steps ahead, a book. Not placed neatly on a pedestal or shelf, but lying open, abandoned, like it had been dropped. The pages fluttered, though there was no wind. Eliza approached. There was no title on the spine. No name, just soft brown leather, scuffed at the corners, like it had been well-loved or hurriedly handled. As she drew nearer, she heard it. A whisper, but not like before, not a voice from within the book. A voice beside it. Low. Urgent. You shouldn't be here yet. Eliza spun around. Nothing. No one. Then the voice came again, this time from above. Go back, before it finds you. And then the sound of pages turning fast, too fast, like wind riffling through 100 books at once. A cold breath passed through the stacks. The lanterns dimmed, and far off, somewhere deep in the shelves, a sound echoed. Not footsteps, dragging, like something old. Eliza backed away from the fallen book. And then, without quite knowing why, she turned and ran. Through the shelves, under the hanging roots, past the stairwell carved in the tree. She didn't stop until she reached the clearing at the center, where her book waited, still unopened to the deeper pages, still listening. Behind her, the sound had stopped. The library was quiet again. Too quiet. Eliza stood in the clearing, heart still fluttering in her chest like a bird unsure of its cage. The silence pressed against her skin. Not empty listening. The book with her name on it remained exactly where she'd left it. Calm, undisturbed, patient. She didn't move toward it yet. Behind her, the shelves loomed, unmoving. The dragging sound was gone. The voice, that strange, warning whisper, had fallen silent. Then, as if stitched out of shadow and lamplight, the curator appeared. One moment, the space beside her was empty. The next, they were there, tall and still, wrapped in a long coat the color of pressed violets, their silver spectacles gleaming though no light touched them. They regarded her gently. You felt it, they said softly. Not a question. Eliza nodded. I didn't mean to go where I wasn't supposed to, she said, breath-catching. The book on the floor, something was there. The curator tilted their head. Some memories are restless. They stepped closer, their voice quieter now, like turning a page in a sleeping room. You must understand, Eliza, the library remembers everything, even what people want to forget, especially that. Eliza looked past them, toward the shelves. Is there something dangerous here? The curator's expression flickered. Not alarm, exactly, but a kind of melancholy. There are stories that unravel when disturbed, ones that were never meant to end. Some books hold sadness that learned to walk on its own. A pause. Their eyes, reflecting the shelves behind her, seemed older than the room. But they will not harm you unless you give them permission. Eliza swallowed. Then why did it warn me? The curator smiled, gently. Because something in you is waking. And not everything wants to be remembered. They turned toward her book, resting quietly on the pedestal. You came back because you're ready to ask the next question. Eliza glanced at the book. Her name shimmered faintly. I don't know what the question is. You will, the curator said. Memory waits for courage, not answers. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the curator stepped away, not vanishing this time, but walking slowly into the shelves, as if dissolving into the stories themselves. And once again, Eliza was alone, except for her book. Waiting, Eliza stepped closer. The book hadn't changed, still gently warm to the touch, the soft leather humming faintly with something that felt like breath held just under the surface. She opened it. The first pages greeted her like old shadows, familiar fragments, glimpses of summers long faded, bare feet in grass, the scent of jam on the wind, a voice that might have been her mother's calling from the edge of a garden. Then, as she turned to the next section, something stopped her. A gap. One page had been carefully removed. Not torn or carelessly ripped, but cut as if with a blade right at the spine. A thin, pale scar of missing memory. Eliza touched the space where it should have been. The paper on either side was cool and quiet. And on the following page, something stranger still. A line of handwriting, not the flowing ink that had filled the earlier entries, but something sharper, darker, scribbled in haste. She asked me to forget, but I couldn't. No signature, no context, just that one sentence, standing like a door left ajar in an unfamiliar hallway. Eliza's pulse quickened. She glanced behind her, half expecting the curator to return or for the whispering of the shelves to rise again. But the library remained hushed. She turned the page. Another memory began to form, but already her thoughts tugged back to the missing one. Who had removed it? Who had written the note? And why did the words make her feel cold, like standing barefoot in fog? Her eyes drifted back to the gap. A memory had been taken, or hidden, or given away. Eliza's fingers curled around the edge of the book. She needed to know more. Eliza stood there for a long moment, fingers still on the edge of the book, heart caught between what she knew and what she was beginning to suspect. She gently closed it. The whispering in the air didn't resume, but something else stirred. A change in the light, a hush like a breath drawn in. The library was listening. "I want to know what was taken," she whispered. There was no reply, but just as she turned, something shifted to her left, a sound too precise to be wind. Tichempi, a soft noise like a book falling gently onto a cushion. Eliza turned. One of the high shelves, a narrow alcove she hadn't explored before, had lit itself with a low golden glow. A single book now rested on a reading pedestal that hadn't been there a moment ago. It wasn't her book. This one was bound in deep red cloth, the corners worn but carefully stitched. A pressed flower had been tucked inside the cover, faded almost to transparency. Eliza stepped closer. There was no name on the outside. But when she opened it, the first page read, Agnes. Her breath caught. The handwriting was different, sharper, a little unsure. But there was no mistake. Her aunt. The book opened like the others, not with paragraphs or scenes, but with fragments, images, feelings, and questions. I should have told her sooner. The garden wasn't mine to close. She was only trying to help. Eliza's fingers tightened on the edge of the page. A flicker of memory, not hers, passed behind her eyes. A pair of hands planting forget-me-nots. A voice raised in anger, then silence like a slammed door. Then a name whispered, but muffled, like it had been deliberately blurred. The next page shimmered and stopped her cold. It showed 2 books, side by side. One marked Eliza, the other Agnes. A line connected them, faint, frayed, but still there. And beneath it, a sentence had been written in gold ink. Some stories must be read together to be understood. Eliza closed the book slowly, cradling it as if it might break. She was beginning to understand. Whatever had been taken from her book might still exist in her aunt's, and the library had just given her permission. Eliza held the red book close, fingers pressed to the cloth cover as though it might slip away if she let go. She turned in place, scanning the quiet shelves. "Curator," she called softly. The sound barely rose above the hush, as if the library had muffled her voice on purpose. She took a slow step forward. "I found something." She tried again. "Something with my aunt's name." The library did not respond, but the lights above the nearest shelves dimmed, then glowed again like blinking. Eliza turned down one of the winding corridors, then another. The air was cool, dry, threaded with lavender and old ink. Every turn seemed to stretch the silence longer. "Please," she whispered. "I don't want to steal anything. I need to understand." She came to a quiet corner where the shelves curved into a reading nook. A single velvet chair sat beneath a hanging lantern, its light as soft as candle flame. Empty. She sat down, cradling the book in her lap, and waited. Minutes passed. Then a rustle. A page turning somewhere close. Then another. A hush like footsteps moving just beyond the edge of sight. And then the air changed. The curator stepped from the shadows between 2 shelves, as though the library had released them. They did not speak at first. Their coat was buttoned higher tonight, their hands gloved, their expression unreadable behind the glint of spectacles. Eliza stood. "I found her book," she said quietly. "Agnes's. The library gave it to me." The curator nodded once. "Then it is time. But is it allowed?" "I mean reading someone else's memories." The curator tilted their head. "It is not forbidden," they said, "but it is sacred." They stepped closer, their voice low and clear. When a memory is sealed, it is usually because someone asked for it to be. Sometimes out of pain, sometimes out of love, and sometimes. They paused because they believed the story could not be shared. Eliza clutched the book tighter. "I don't want to break anything," she said, "but part of my story is missing, and I think it's inside hers." The curator regarded her for a long moment. Then slowly, they extended a gloved hand toward the book. Not to take it, but to rest their fingers gently atop the cover. The lantern above them dimmed to a warm amber. "There is a room," they said, "for shared stories. It only appears when 2 books begin to open to each other." They stepped back, and the aisle behind them opened quite literally. The shelves drew apart with a quiet shiver of dust and time. Beyond them, a round room filled with mirrored glass and twin reading pedestals. A table between them. 2 cups of tea already steaming, though neither had been poured. The curator looked at her once more. "You may read," they said, but read with kindness. Even painful stories bloom when met with gentle hands. And with that, they turned and vanished once more into the folds of the library. Eliza stepped to the threshold of the mirrored room. The light inside was gentler than elsewhere in the library, as though it didn't come from lanterns at all, but from the reflections themselves. Every surface held a flicker of candle glow, a shimmer of sky. The mirrors didn't show her face exactly, not quite, but instead, softened impressions of her as a child, in motion, in memory. The 2 pedestals waited. The books. The tea. Eliza hesitated. The red book in her arms felt heavier now, not in weight, but in meaning. It should be simple. A story, a memory, a truth. But something inside her pressed back. What if she learned something she didn't want to know? What if her aunt had hidden that page for a reason? She glanced behind her, half expecting the curator to still be watching. But the aisle was empty, swallowed by shelves. The tea let off slow spirals of steam. She crossed the threshold, 1 foot at a time, as if the floor might shift beneath her. The mirrors didn't distort, but they didn't comfort either. Each glance offered a different version of herself. Unsure, older, younger, a flash of her mother's smile around the eyes. She reached the nearest pedestal, placed her own book on the velvet cushion, then the other, Aunt Agnes's, beside it. She did not open either. Not yet. She sat. The teacup was warm when she lifted it, fragrant like lemon balm and sage. She held it between both hands and let the warmth soak into her skin. And for a while, she simply sat. Not brave, not afraid, just still, letting the quiet speak for her. The 2 books opened at once. Not by Eliza's hands, but gently, as if stirred by breath. A thin shimmer passed between them, like gold thread catching the light. And the mirrors in the room grew still, no longer reflecting Eliza at all. They showed a garden. Not the one behind Aunt Agnes's cottage, not yet overgrown, but wild in a different way. Lush with violets and marigolds, sunflowers nodding in the breeze. Bees drifted lazily past. And in the middle of it all, a child knelt in the grass. It was Eliza, no more than 6 or 7, barefoot, hands covered in dirt, trying earnestly to tuck a bulb into the earth. Nearby, a younger Agnes stood watching. Her braid was tighter then, her shoulders straighter, but her eyes held the same weight they carried now, quiet, cautious, endlessly observant. The memory whispered into Eliza's ears like a breeze behind the eyes. That one's upside down, love. Agnes's voice, gentle, amused. Eliza in the memory frowned deeply, stubborn. It's not. I checked. Even the stubbornest flower won't bloom if you bury it backwards. A pause. Not everything has to bloom, The child version of Eliza muttered. The older Agnes didn't respond right away. She knelt beside her, helped turn the bulb with a slow, sure motion. No, she said quietly, but everything deserves the chance. The memory shifted. A table, indoors, late summer light pouring through the curtains. Two voices raised behind a closed door, not shouting, but sharp. One of them was her mother. Eliza in the memory sat at the table, drawing, but her hand trembled slightly. The real Eliza, watching now, leaned closer. The door cracked open. Agnes stepped out, her face composed, but pale. She saw Eliza, paused. Then, kneeling again, she said, "Do you want to come outside? I know a secret place." And the scene faded. The books turned another page. This time, only Agnes's book glowed. No image, just ink. Shaky, written long after. She trusted me. I promised to keep her safe from what I couldn't explain. But I was too proud, too angry at her mother. I shut the garden. I shut the stories. I shut the door. Another sentence appeared slowly, as if written while Eliza watched, and she forgot the one person who needed her most. Eliza sat back. Her hands were trembling now. The two books remained open, pages waiting. There were still more memories inside, but already something inside her was shifting. A thread that had gone slack years ago was being gently pulled taut again. The next page turned without her touch, and the room around her dimmed, softening into twilight. The mirrors shimmered again, and another scene unfolded. A smaller cottage, different than the one they lived in now. Ivy crept up the stones, but less wild. There was laughter inside, not loud, but genuine. Agnes, younger still, was at the table. Beside her, a woman who looked very much like Eliza's mother, but softer. She had flour-dusted hands and tired eyes that still shone with warmth. Between them sat a wooden box. Inside, a collection of tiny, handmade books, stitched with colored thread, pages uneven, titles written in a child's careful scrawl. "She'll love these," the mother said, smiling. "Eliza will think they're magic." Agnes hesitated. "I don't know if she should have them." "Why not?" "Because they're stories about forgetting and remembering and things that aren't real." The mother's voice softened. "That's what stories are for." She placed a hand over Agnes's. "You've always known that." The scene shifted. A storm, wind battering the windows. Eliza, perhaps 9 now, curled in a chair, clutching a book. Not one of the magical ones, a plain one. The room was tense. Agnes stood by the window, arms folded. The memory did not let her voice rise, but Eliza could feel the heat behind it. "She doesn't need more fairy tales," Agnes said to someone unseen. "She needs roots, not riddles." "You're not angry at her," came the reply. "You're angry at me." A crash of thunder. The voice was her mother's. "Agnes, please, don't close the library." The words hung in the air like a bell toll. And in the mirror, Eliza saw it. The door, covered in ivy, shutting itself slowly like stone being laid over a well. A page turned. Agnes's book again. Ink trembling small. I locked the door the night she left. I thought it would protect Eliza, keep her in the world that was real. But I see it now, it only took something from her I had no right to take. Eliza pressed her hand gently to the page. The ink did not vanish, but a final note appeared at the bottom. There's one story left, the one I was too afraid to write. And in her own book, a faint glow rose up through the spine. A ribbon of golden thread drifted out, soft and pulsing, pointing not at the mirror, but toward the shelves beyond. Toward one last book, one not written yet, one still waiting. Eliza didn't move. The ribbon of golden thread hung in the air, swaying slightly, as if waiting for her to follow. But she stayed seated between the two books, hands folded in her lap. Her tea had gone cold. The mirrored room felt neither warm nor cold now, just still, like the moment before a tide changes. She looked down at her hands. There was still dirt under her fingernails from the garden. She let her eyes drift over the two open books before her, one hers, one her aunt's, their pages like twin windows into a time she'd forgotten or been asked to forget. The ache that rose in her chest wasn't sharp. It was soft, lingering, like the hush left behind after someone has spoken something true. Her aunt had loved her, even in her silence, even in her mistakes. And somewhere, in a story not yet written, there was more to understand. Eliza stood slowly. She ran her hand over the book with her name, then over Agnes's. "I'll come back," she whispered. "I promise." She closed them both gently. The golden thread hovered at shoulder height now, still pulsing, but not pulling, as if it understood. She stepped back from the pedestals. The mirrored room did not vanish, but the reflections began to soften again. The images faded to mist, and the door through which she had entered opened once more. No wind, no sound, just a space cleared for her to return. Eliza crossed the threshold and stepped into the library's main passage again, the mirrored room disappearing behind her like a sigh into the shelves. The golden thread faded, curling into the air like smoke, its message delivered. She didn't walk in any particular direction, just let her feet guide her. The hush of the library pressed softly around her, like snow falling in slow motion. Somewhere in the distance, a page turned by itself. She wandered past maps etched in silver ink, past drawers of glass beads that rattled softly when she passed. A corridor of dream journals, catalogued by scent. A globe that turned when she looked away. Then a low hum. A nook she hadn't seen before. It was round, like a little alcove carved out from the shelves themselves. A single wooden bench inside, and above it a window not to the outside, but to a ceiling filled with drifting starlight. Not real stars, not quite, but they shimmered with memory. Soft voices whispered here, not stories, but snippets. Laughter behind a closed door. A lullaby hummed off-key, a child reciting a poem and forgetting the end. Eliza sat. She leaned back and let the hum fill her chest. And then she noticed, tucked beside her on the bench, a tiny notebook, smaller than her hand, bound in green cloth. No title. She picked it up. Inside, blank pages, but not entirely blank. At the bottom of the first, written in thin gold ink, some stories aren't found. They're made a little at a time. Eliza smiled, the first true smile in days. She pressed the notebook to her chest and closed her eyes for a moment. Then, quietly, she stood and began her way back through the library, steps a little steadier, heart a little fuller, carrying a story not yet told. The ivy wall was still. Moonlight silvered its edges, turning every leaf into a coin of shadow and shimmer. The garden beyond was hushed, the sort of hush that only comes deep into the night, not from sleep, but from listening. Eliza stepped out softly, careful not to break the spell. The wooden door eased shut behind her with a quiet click. No dramatic closing, no vanishing into moss, just a gentle promise. You may return when you're ready. She turned to face the garden. It looked different by starlight. The worn stone path glowed faintly. Dew clung to the edges of the thyme. Somewhere out of sight, an owl called once, low and sure. The house was lit from within, not brightly, but just enough. A golden square of window glowed through the branches. She could see the kitchen table from here, and the soft silhouette of her aunt moving through the room. No kettle whistling. Not yet. Just the slow, steady rhythm of a quiet house waiting. Eliza stood a moment longer in the night garden. She looked down at the small green notebook in her hand. Still blank. Still warm from the bench where she'd found it. She held it to her chest, heart steady now, and let the night settle around her like a shawl. The cottage was dark except for a single lamp left on in the hallway, a small pool of golden light that barely reached the stairs. Eliza stepped inside and closed the door behind her with care. The night pressed gently at her back before giving way to the warmth of the house. It smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, with a hint of something sweet. Perhaps Agnes had baked again, though the kitchen now lay in shadow. She slipped off her shoes and padded softly through the rooms. The sitting room was still. A book lay closed on the armchair, a blanket folded over the back. At the edge of the hall, she saw the faint light beneath Agnes's door. But it didn't open, and Eliza didn't knock. Not yet. She moved up the stairs quietly to her own small room beneath the eaves. Moonlight spilled in through the round window, pooling on the quilt like spilled milk. The green notebook glowed faintly in her hands, not with magic, but memory. She set it on the desk, then stood a moment at the window, looking out over the moonlit garden. From here, the ivy wall was barely visible, just a darker shadow among shadows. But she could feel it. Still there. Still waiting. She curled into bed without changing, pulling the blanket up around her shoulders. For the first time since she'd arrived, The silence of the cottage didn't feel lonely. It felt full, like a story paused between chapters. And as sleep finally came for her, soft and steady, Eliza dreamed not of forgotten things, but of pages still unwritten, fluttering in the dark.